Hello everyone. I've just thought I'd do a little video just to get you prepared for paper 2 tomorrow. I'll email this document or email it to you, but I just thought I'd do a little video just to explain a couple of things for you. As you know by now, the rule in paper 2 and paper 1 really is answer the bloody question. So that's just basically telling you don't do a brain dump, don't write down everything you know about a particular topic if it's mentioned. Actually answer the question that's being asked of you, address it directly, and that will lead to a much better mark rather than just kind of writing down everything you know about a particular issue. Okay, so let's look at paper 2. When you're in that perusal time, selecting the right question is really important. My advice is quickly read through parts A through to F and make a judgment about which question you'd be able to maximise your result from parts A through to F, right? That would be the basis of my choice because it's easier to get the 25 marks from A through to F, and a little bit more of a struggle when you're trying to answer part G. In terms of timing, I would allocate around 50 minutes to doing those short answer questions. If it takes you a few extra minutes, that's cool, so long as that kind of extra minutes will ensure that you get everything right. You can write that down in your margin. Write down 50 minutes for this and 55 minutes for part G, but there's nothing wrong with putting in the margin the time that you would allocate or dedicate to questions. Okay, let's look at the 4-marker questions with diagrams. As you know, only write 6 to 8 lines. Because the allocation is 2 marks for diagrams, 2 marks for explanations. So as I say there, you don't have to write a PhD, just be pretty straightforward. First thing you should always do is explain and identify the determinant that causes a change, because that's what the question will be about. There's been some change and you've got to show that dynamic change using the diagram and explain it. So, identify and explain the determinant that does change and brings about the change in the variables being measured. So the second sentence should be, describe or explain any shift that might happen, and then the consequences of that shift in terms of the variables being measured on the axis. So if you're doing ADAS, one of the determinants of those two curves will change. You explain the change, then in which direction does the ADAS or shift, and then you would make some kind of comment about what might happen to the price level or real GDP or unemployment, whatever it is that's being measured on the axis. But make sure you actually read the question and understand what it is that you actually have to show. The 4 markers, don't overthink them. The answers are pretty obvious. So you don't have to do any fancy convoluted explanation. It will be the most obvious answer, and sometimes there are multiple solutions to the question, but my advice is don't overthink the 4 markers because they do want you to get those ones correct. In terms of the diagrams, if you've gone through all the previous exams, there's a standard bunch of diagrams they use. They just change the scenarios quite often. So there'll be demand and supply diagrams. There'll be demand and supply diagrams where you might actually have to show either expenditure or revenue boxes that consumers have to pay or producers earn. A good chance you might have price floors, price ceilings, as an option. Definitely there'll be externality diagrams. With regards to the externality diagrams, I would know all 4 scenarios in terms of the 2 consumption externalities, positive and negative, and then the 2 production externalities, both positive, negative. ADAS, pretty much given. I would expect there would be at least one, if not two questions on ADAS. PPFs, okay, what may cause them to shift either inwards or outwards? But having said that, last year's paper, or was it May's paper, there was a movement in. So, you know, if there's an increase in unemployment or underemployment, then rather than shifting the frontier, it might be represented by a movement further in the frontier, or it could also be you're told that you are fully employed and then you might have to show a trade-off between one of the products and the other products. Make sure you get the labelling right on that, so have like good A, good B, or good X, good Y, or consumer goods or capital goods, because often people do make mistakes there. Exchange rates, obviously a given. You know, one of the determinants of exchange rates will change, and that could be floating or fixed. And then you know, just work through the scenario following that procedure that I suggested. Business cycle diagram could pop up, J-curve diagram, Lorenz curves, and then the traditional protectionist diagrams around tariffs, quotas, subsidies, export subsidies, and then if it's a development kind of question, then you know they could ask you to sketch the poverty cycle. And if you do get a poverty cycle diagram as a 4-marker, or even if you want to use it in Part G, make sure you fully explain every step in the cycle, because that will enable you to write a decent paragraph, and there's a kind of expectation that you would do that. The bullet point there says just check previous exams, so I would just go run through a lot of all the previous exams and see the type of questions and diagrams they've been using. They're pretty familiar to you by now, but just you know, do a quick check. Make sure you're really careful with labels. You know, get the right labelling correct. The only other thing I would add is that point that I've made there where it says with the exchange rate diagram, make it easy for yourself. Don't complicate it. On the vertical axis, just simply write ER or exchange rate, and then your points of equilibrium on the vertical axis just should be labelled ER0 and ER1 to show the dynamic change. Keep it really simple there. People drop a mark, you know, from poor labelling of that vertical axis. Keep it simple. Don't complicate it. Okay, I'm just going to have a little break now to catch my breath. Okay, back again. So I was just talking to Mr. Keener. Just looking at the next little section there on calculations, what could they be? Look, they're usually straightforward. They might give you a table or some data in the text, and you just got to, you know, work out very simple calculations that, you know, there should be bread and butter for you guys. But as you can see, it could be elasticity, it could be, you know, growth rates in GDP, GNI per capita. You could be asked to calculate unemployment rates, the CPI or inflation, or, you know, the balance of payments. So they might get you to calculate the current account, or they might ask you to work out the balance of trade. So, you know, I would definitely skim over the balance of payments because you have to know it. Be mindful, especially on paper 2 and probably more so on paper 3, that sometimes in a table they will give you more data than what you actually need. So you've got to know your formulas pretty well, because it might be a matter of what you include, what you exclude when it comes to your calculation. The regular warning, you know, I mean, a lot of you guys dropped marks in year 11 because you know, when you wrote your final response, if it had to do with an amount, you have to have the correct currency, whether it's US dollars or Korean won or Australian dollars, Kiwi dollars, whatever. Make sure you put that sign in, and also make sure you include all the zeros. Calculation should always end in 2 decimal places, and in terms of rounding up, I would round up to 2 decimal places at the end rather than doing it throughout your working out. Okay, so do it at the end, not during the working out. If you get the sketch and draw command term, don't forget you don't have to write anything except the labels, you just literally draw it, okay? So do not explain anything, just sketch the diagram and label the diagram. That is sufficient. That's all the command term requires you to do. You may get that, you may not. Definitions, the rough rule of thumb is 2 sentences, but sometimes you can get away with one detailed sentence, but you must ensure that you tell the examiner 2 things or 2 aspects of the definition being asked, okay? Be very tight on your definitions because they tend to mark them pretty hard, so no sloppiness, be pretty meticulous and write down the correct definition. Just some hints there, if you get GDP or version of GDP as your definition, make sure you say it's the market value, all right? Market value of production. Please say that, because if not, you might just get 1. Same thing with inflation. You're pretty good at this because we've drummed it into you and most of you get this right. It's a sustained increase in the price level, right? If you don't write sustained, you will only get 1 mark. Okay, so just be mindful of those definitions and you need to be pretty accurate and correct there to get the full 2 marks. Part G. Okay, Part G I would allocate 50 to 55 minutes, and like I said, if you need a few extra minutes to answer A through to F, then do so, because it's important to get those easy marks in the bank. But I would allocate 50-55 minutes to Part G. Again, you might want to remind yourself by writing that number in the margin. Take a deep breath, right? It's very clear to me when I look at the EURs from previous students or looking at your own work, the kids that spend 5 minutes planning tend to do significantly better than kids that don't plan. All right, so take some time planning your response. Maybe 5 minutes should be sufficient, and then don't forget to use a mnemonic HAP. Okay, so H stands for highlight text and data. A is for annotate, so make a note to yourself why you've underlined or highlighted a particular bit of prose from the text or the numbers. I would make sure you definitely use both text and numbers in your response. The numbers or the table of numbers are not there for dress up, they are there to be used. So please use both quantitative and qualitative aspects from the case study in your response. And then, of course, P stands for plan the essay, right? So please plan. Mr. Fredrickson with the Business Kids comes up with a really good phrase, engage with the case study. Right? You might subconsciously influence the examiner if the examiner sees your case study or your script, or they may not see it, but if they see the plan, they might feel subjectively more favourable towards your paper. But on your exam booklet, if I was walking around the exam, which I won't be, I know by looking at how much you've highlighted and how much you've annotated how well you would do. Okay, so as I said, the kids that highlight and annotate and plan tend to do significantly better. All right, you can see the highlight there, the same message. Answer the bloody question. Do not do the brain dump. Do not write down everything you know about the topic. Actually answer the question, right? And the big tip there is to actually use the phrasing of the question as your topic sentences and your link statements for every single paragraph, right? Answer the bloody question in the conclusion too. So when you write the conclusion, make sure you've reached a judgment, a substantiated judgment, and make sure you actually explicitly answer the question that's been set. The big tip, it should look like, and you should write it like your page 3 of your IA. So when you think about it, that's all you're really doing in Part G. You're doing a mini IA under a time constraint. You're given a case study, which is somewhat equivalent to a newspaper article. You've got some text and numbers, and you're asked to do some evaluation. So it should look very similar to, your page 3 of your IA. We suggest you use the top structure. So your paragraphs should have a theme, and whether that theme is stakeholders, whether that theme is the time dimension, always have a theme and then have a claim and a counterclaim within that same paragraph, right? As I say there, keep arguing with yourself. And I often, have used in class the quote by President Truman, who, was frustrated with economists, and where he said, find me a one-handed economist. All that simply means is, you need to use phrases such as, on the other hand, this might happen, or on the other hand, this might happen, or it will depend, whether or not a policy is going to be effective. Will depend upon the circumstances or the context. So that will give you those circumstances and context in the case study. And so the examiner will love it if they see you having that argument with yourself. So it might be, this should happen. On the other hand, it may not happen because of this, blah, blah, blah. So don't be afraid to, use however. On the other hand, it depends, because that shows more nuanced argument and more sophisticated evaluation, which should lead to a higher mark. Keep arguing and counter-arguing throughout, and use the phrases from the question to signpost to the examiner that you are evaluating. So, if they're saying evaluate the view that monetary policy or export promotion is an effective policy, then use phrases, yes, it's highly effective, or not very effective, or it's mainly effective, or it's insignificant. If it's about impact that a policy might have, talk about major impacts, minor impacts, negative impacts, positive impacts, right? Use the phrasing of the actual question. Develop your claims and counterclaims, so don't just state it, explain it by using theory, and then use quotes from the text as evidence and stimulus only. So don't overuse the quotes, because if you overuse the quotes, it will be deemed to be descriptive and not analytical. So again, it should resemble your page 3 on your IA, which just simply means the text, be it prose or quantitative numbers, is the stimulus and the evidence to support your claim and counterclaim, right? If you do use quotes, make sure you put inverted commas, or quickly write down, it comes from text A, line 5 or line 7, whatever it is, right? Show the examiner, make it very explicit and clear to the examiner that you are synthesizing, right? So make it really visible. Don't let the examiner be a mind reader. Make the exam easy for them to mark. Do all the right things. Make it look good. Okay, don't forget, use double teal top structure, so claim and counterclaim. So when you make a claim, follow the teal structure. Okay, topic sentence, evidence, example, A for application and analysis, L for link statement back to the actual question. So every paragraph, every conclusion of every paragraph should be answering the question. Use quotation marks, identify the paragraph it comes from, and then show the examiner you are synthesizing, as I said earlier. Now, where possible, in Part G, draw a diagram and explain it thoroughly. okay? So they are essentially now expected or required in paper 2, and the beauty of it is if you sketch a diagram, you can explain it. Remember, picture paints 1,000 words. So by explaining the diagram in context of the case study, you'll write a decent paragraph and you will be rewarded for it. So I would aim for about 2 diagrams. Where possible, they should not be the same ones as A through to F, but some of the ones that you could look at using might be PPF, ADAS, price ceilings, price floors if they're relevant, Lorenz curves, they're all good things to use, right? So make sure you have at least one, but I would probably favour 2. Write, explain them. Now, you can refer to diagrams from earlier parts, but make sure you add value. So I don't want you to repeat what you wrote in part C in part G. You indicate to the examiner that you're using that diagram, so you're not resketching it, but add value. Add something different to what you wrote in part C, whether it's a variation or something else that might come up. Do something different. Life paragraphs for part G. So intuitively, depending upon the question, there are certain paragraphs you should be using, and they will save you. In a sense, they will get you to a good, strong pass mark. So, anything to do with development, there is absolutely a role for you to sketch the poverty cycle and fully explain that by looking at the various stages. It might be, how foreign aid or FDI might supplement savings or investment. It could be health and education improvements there, could help lift productivity, and then go through the whole cycle step by step. What do all these policies do to snap the poverty cycle so it becomes a virtuous cycle? Or, something that goes wrong may lead to the poverty trap being reinforced, okay? Yep, so as I say there, finish off with a substantiated conclusion by answering the question, like you do in the IA. If you're assessing the effectiveness of a particular policy in Part G, quickly outline the plus and minuses, but reach a judgment and explain to the examiner which of those arguments you made in the essay is the reason why you've concluded the way you've concluded. So again, answer the bloody question. Do not do the brain dump. If you do a brain dump, you are going to get a very, very low score on Part G. Actually answer the question. Possible Part G questions. Look, highly likely you'll get one on growth and development. You might get 2 on growth and development. You might get one on growth. You might get one on development. It might be a policy or set of policies that will promote growth and development. It might be with regards to the impact of policies on growth and development, but I'm pretty sure you'll get at least one. In terms of development, the question could be specific and it could be about market-based versus interventionist policies. So, you talk about the market-based policy, but then you would also mention maybe that some of the interventionist policies might be just as effective or more effective. Okay, so that could be the angle they take. Exchange rate systems might be something to do with the first question. So there, it might be a country that might go from a fixed system to a floating system, or from a fixed to a managed. I would be clear on the 3 systems, floating, fixed and managed. I would know of them, and then their major strengths and weaknesses for each type of system. Question could also be about how a trend of appreciation or a trend of depreciation might affect that particular country. That could be an angle they take. Persistent current account deficits and the effects on the balance of payments. It could also be a persistent current account surplus, and then the policies that would be needed to fix those issues. and then when you do that, the plus and minuses there. There could be free trade versus protectionism type of question. So it could be a case study where the country is moving towards freer trade, or it could be the opposite, where they're starting to raise protection barriers. That could be a question too. And then finally, economic integration. Okay, so whether it's a common market, a customs union, a free trade agreement, or even a monetary union, that could be a question. The recommendation there, if you get a Part G question on development and growth, then I would spend a little bit of time in the opening paragraph unpacking the difference between the two. I would also add too that sometimes growth does not lead development, because not always growth is inclusive. So, I would kind of spend some time explaining to the examiner the difference between growth and development, and then talk about their interdependence, because sometimes growth does lead to development, but sometimes it doesn't. But generally, if an economy develops, we usually see growth. So I would spend a bit of time in the intro unpacking the two, and then in your response, I would spend equal time on growth and development. Do not just talk about one, talk about both, and if need be, separate the paragraphs on the basis of things that contribute to growth and then other things which contribute to development, right? But you must treat them equally if they're both mentioned in the question. Yeah, so that's it. That's my views. I will kind of email this to you, but I will put this video up on Depot, and I'll let you know that that's what I'm doing, and I'll tell you where it is in Depot. But look, we wish you all the best, and that comes from, the whole team, Mr. Keener, myself, Mr. Altoff, and Mr. Scudder, and I'm sure Miss Ravel wishes you all the best too. You can do this, you know what to do in paper 2. If you've practiced those 4 markers, you will be fine. And then if you do a solid job on Part G by answering the bloody question, you will get a very high 6 or a 7 on paper 2. Remember, this one is really important. This is worth 30% towards your final grade. So you've got to nail it. You nail this, you're on your way to a really good result. Okay, guys, wish you all the best. Probably see you tomorrow on Friday. Bye-bye.